Okay. Okay, I'll speak, even though the Mayor Yisrael this week is Balak. I'll speak on Chukas. Maybe next week, when I speak about Pinchas, I'll connect it to Balak, and maybe so we'll have Tashlum and Balak also. Okay, this week's Sedra is parshas Chukas. Parshas Chukas begins with the law of paraduma, the red para that was burnt, and the ashes together with living waters was sprayed on somebody who became contaminated, became tamei, because he came in contact with the dead. And the Torah tells us, Zos Chukas HaTorah. This is the decree of the Torah. In other words, many of the mitzvahs of the Torah are decrees, things that we can't understand. But the ultimate decree of the Torah is paraduma, the law concerning the red cow. Now, and the Torah tells us that even Shlomo HaMelech, our sages said, it said that he could understand everything, but he couldn't understand the reason for paraduma. Now, what is interesting is that Rashi, at the end of the parsha paraduma, cites of Moshe Hadarshan, who gives reasons for paraduma. And so on one hand, we say that we cannot understand the reason for paraduma. It's Zos Chukas HaTorah. Even Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of all men, said that he couldn't understand the reason for paraduma. On the other hand, there is no shortage of explanations, the most famous being Rav Moshe Hadarshan, explaining what the reason for paraduma. And my uncle, I read, suggested that there are three types of reasons. There are three types of reasons. One reason is a reason why. The other is a reason how. And the third is a reason what. Why there is a mitzvah paraduma, we don't understand. How the para purifies someone who came contaminated because he came in contact with the dead, we also not capable of understanding. We're not capable of understanding the whole concept of tumah, of contamination because of coming in contact with the dead. But there is a third type of reason, and that's the reason of what. The reason of what is what lessons I can learn from paraduma. And to each person and to each period of time, there might be a different lesson. The mitzvah paraduma might have one message for me and another message for another person. It might have one message for Jews of one generation and a different lesson for Jews of a different generation. And in a sense, but we have to understand that paraduma ultimately is a chok. It's a command. And we're not capable of understanding the reasons why. It doesn't mean there isn't a reason why. There is a reason why. That it represents the limitation of human understanding. A matter of fact, one is troubled. Why is the mitzvah paraduma mentioned in regard the laws of paraduma mention in regard to someone who came in contact with the dead. But the answer is that the ultimate, when one sees death, when one comes in contact with death, one is troubled. If it's a death of somebody that you are close to, be it a relative, be it a friend. And the question comes in everybody's mind, why? So many books have been written on this topic. The authors have made a lot of money. You have books. Why bad things happen to good people? You have authors that write books about why the Holocaust came. But the truth is, no one can understand that. There are lessons that we can learn. There is the what, but the why we are not capable of understanding. And so the mitzvah paraduma, which represents the ultimate chok, which impresses us with the limitation of human understanding, which implores us that at a certain point we just have to accept, has to do with the reaction of coming in contact with the death, because death represents the ultimate tragedy. And we really can't understand the why of most tragedies. Now, Moshe Darshan, he explains paraduma is let the mother, the para is the mother cow, come and clean the mess that was made by the baby cow, that was the Egel Hazav, the golden calf. And our sages already tell us that there is some kind of connection between the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, the sin of the golden calf, and the paraduma. And the burning of the red cow, the use of its ashes to spray together with the living waters on the person who came in contact with the dead. And the question is, what is the connection between the Egel Hazav, the sin of the golden calf, and the paraduma? It must be something more than just that this was an egel, a baby cow, and this is the mother cow. Matter of fact, according to many medrashim, the parsha of paraduma was revealed to Moshe and Mara shortly after they left Egypt. And that was before the Egel Zav, before the sin of the golden calf. So what does it mean that the Egel Hazav, that the paraduma is the kapara, is the atonement for the Egel Hazav, for the sin of the golden calf? Now, I want to suggest I already mentioned what my uncle said, that in trying to understand paraduma, we can only understand it from the perspective of the what, of the lesson that we can deduce from it. And to each person and to each period of time, there is a different lesson. I would like to suggest an explanation that I thought of many years ago regarding Parah Adumah. Now, there are two perspectives that one could have of life. One can see life as a process of living, and one can see life as a process of dying. Each day is an extra day of life, but each day is a day closer to a person's ultimate death. And to a certain degree, it all depends on the attitude of a person. You have people who could live very long lives, but the life is a process of dying. It's to a certain degree, the person lives in a form of depression, never happy, doesn't see anything worth in life. On the other hand, you have people who might even live short lives, and they might be sick during their lives, but they die only in one moment. But until that moment, with all their sicknesses and with all the challenges they face, life is a process of living rather than a process of dying. Now, we see when Yaakov, when Esav, Torah tells us in Parshas Toldos that Esav comes from the field and he sees that Yaakov is preparing lentil soup, red lentil soup. And he says to Yaakov, give me the lentil soup. And Yaakov says, Michra kayomis b'choros chali. Sell me on this day or like this day. Your birthright. What did the birthright manifest itself? The birthright manifests itself in being the successor to Abraham and Yitzchak. And Esav agrees, and he asks Yaakov, according to our sages, to pour the soup down his throat. And he sells the Bechorah, he sells the birthright for a pot of lentil soup. Now, Esav was a wicked man, but he wasn't stupid. Apparently, for him, the Bechorah was worth more. The lentil soup was worth more than the Bechorah, than the birthright. And the question is why? Why should the Bechorah have been worth more than the birthright? And I think the answer is because, as Esav said himself, what happened on that day? Why was it that Yaakov was preparing lentil soup? So the Medrash says that was the day that Avram passed away. And when Esav heard that Avram passed away, he said, Im meso suzokain. If that elderly person died, les din v'les dayan. There is no law and there is no judge. In a sense, Esav confronted death. But Esav's confrontation of death resulted in his seeing life as a process of dying rather than a process of living. It's also mentioned that Esav murdered somebody on that day. So, and it's interesting, the Epicurean approach is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. One reaction, and there are other reactions, one reaction to seeing life as a process of dying is indulgence. So for Esav, Anochi holech lomas, Esav vayives Esav v'sabachora. Esav looked with disdain at the birthright. Vayomer Anochi holech lomas, I'm going to die. V'lama li b'chora. What do I need the b'chora for? If life is a process of dying. So all the spirituality, the Bechorah manifests itself in spirituality. All the spirituality is meaningless. Indulgence. That's what's important. And similarly, Yaakov, when he heard Toraf Yosef, when he was presented with the Gesonis Pasim, with the blood on it, and he thought that Yosef was torn apart by an animal, and by Yakumu, a Banav of Nosav Lenachmo, and his children stood up to offer him consolation. And the Torah says, Vayemoin, in a very strong form. He refused. And what did he say? He said, Anochi holech lamus. Anochi ered livni shola. I will go down to the grave, to my son. For Yaakov also, life became a process of dying rather than a process of living. But there were two differences between Esav's reaction and Yaakov's reaction. Esav's reaction manifests itself in indulgence. Indulgence received importance, and everything else lost significance. And Yaakov, on the contrary, it represented a form, his belief that Yosef was dead, represented to him the beginning of a state of withdrawal. He withdrew from the world. We see very little about Yaakov. Yaakov is in a different type of depression. It's Vayemoin and Anochi ered livni shola. Life is a process of dying. But Yaakov also, when he heard, oh, Joseph Chai, when he heard that Joseph was still alive, but the Chi Ruach Yaakov Avihem, Yaakov was able to reverse the process of life from being a process of dying into a process of living. It's very interesting that the last Sedrin parshas Bereshis, but starts off a Yechi Yaakov Eretz Mitzrayim Shvas Reishana. Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. Now in English, we use the word Vayechi to imply living. I mean, the word living means, on one hand, living, he breathed, he's alive, and it also means residing. I live in Hollywood Park. Doesn't emphasize the fact that I'm breathing. I am breathing, but it emphasizes the point of residing. But in Hebrew, we have two very distinct terms. Vayechi. When do you mention Vayechi? We mention Vayechi when we talk about the length of a person's life. However, when we talk about a person residing in a certain place, we use the word Vayeshev. The Torah uses the word Vayeshev. The more appropriate word to have been used in Vayechi is Vayeshev Yaakov Beretz Mitzrayim Shvas Reishana. Yaakov resided in the land of Egypt 17 years. It's very interesting. The Medrash, there's I think the Balaturim cites a Medrash that the 17 years that Yaakov was in Egypt, supported by Yosef, correspond with the 17 years that Yosef was supported by Yaakov in Eretz Canaan before he was sold down to Egypt. The question is, what's the correlation? What is the relationship? But no one will say that the first 17 years of a person's life, when he is supported by his parents, that's a process of dying. No. Those are the most productive years of a person's life. Just so I think what the Medrash is trying to tell us, just like the 17 years that Yaakov supported Yosef, those were very productive years for Yosef. Life was a process of living, not a process of dying. So too, the last 17 years of Yaakov's life, when he was in Egypt, in exile, supported by Yosef, those were also productive years. Those were years of living, not years of dying. There is a misconception that when one retires, he enters the years that are part of the process of dying. On the contrary, you retire perhaps from a job, and you don't always have to, but you do not retire from life. And that's what the Torah is telling us. Vayechi Yaakov Beretz Mitzrayim Shvas Reishana. That Yaakov, even in exile, and even after having seen life as a process of dying, and even after saying Anochi Yered Livni Sha'olah, was able to reverse the process from being of life as being from being a process of dying into being a process of living. Now, when we take a look at the Egel Hazav, what is it that, in a sense, initiated the Jewish people to ask that an Egel Hazav, that a golden calf, be built for them? When they went to Aaron, they said, Ki zeh Moshe ha'ish, lo yadanu mehayalo. This mortal man, Moshe, we don't know what happened to him. And the Medrash tells us that the Satan, and who is the Satan? The Satan is the Yetzer Hara, as our sages tell us. He's the Malach HaMaves. The Satan made it appear to them as if Moshe had died. And what was the purpose of the Egel Hazav? So they had an Egel Hazav, a golden calf, and they gave korbanos sacrifices to this golden calf. But then, what does the Torah tell us? Vayochlu, vayishtu, vayakumu l'tzachek. They ate, they drank, and they got up to be merry. The Epicurean approach. When they saw life as a process of dying, when they saw in their minds Moshe Rabbeinu being dead, Moshe who took them out of Egypt. So life became a process of dying for them. So like Esav, they reacted by indulgence. The purpose of the Egel Hazav was to give religious fervor to the indulgence. But the goal was Vayochlu, Vayishtu, Vayakumu l'tzachek, to eat, to drink, and to be merry. So the Egel Hazav, the Egel Hazav, what came as a result of seeing and considering life as a process of dying rather than a process of living. Now let us consider what is the mikveh, tahara? What is the process of tahara? Now, it's been pointed out by many, I think, probably my uncle, and many have taken it from him, that almost all forms of tumah are associated with death. In some form or shape. But I want to focus on what the process of tahara, but certainly Tumas mess, the special tumah, the severe contamination from coming in contact with the dead is certainly identified with death. What is the process of tahara? Let's say the mikveh, when a person puts their head below the water, they are in a medium of non-existence. Person can't survive with his head underneath the water. And in a sense, the Achronim discuss is the process of tahara when you put your head underneath the water or when you emerge from the water. In other words, we could suggest the process of tahara is going from a state of non-existence into a state of existence. Or we can put it in a state of seeing life as a process of dying into seeing life as a process of living. And what the ashes of the red heifer, the red cow, red, the Mepharshim point out, is the symbol of sin. But ashes represent complete destruction. And that was combined with living waters, waters from a spring or a river, whatever it might be, which is the symbol of life. And they're sprinkled on the person who came in contact with the dead. And then later, the person goes into the mikveh. What is the symbolism? What is the what of that halacha? The what of that halacha is that even from destruction, there can be life. And I think this also is perhaps the lesson of Paraduma. The lesson of Paraduma is that we often confront the pressing circumstances, and we cannot understand why. But we have to understand there's more to life. It's not just ashes. There is living water as well. And it's up to us. It's up to us to change the situation. And my uncle once mentioned in regard to tshuva, atonement, tahara, he said, on one hand, you had with the Kohen sprinkled the ashes with the water on the person who became tameh, who became contaminated. That's something done by somebody else, by another person. But then a person in the mikveh, no one puts him in the mikveh. He has to go in the mikveh, lower his body in the water, and then he has to emerge. Sometimes when we deal, my uncle was talking about spiritual tumah. That's certainly true about spiritual tumah. You have to seek guidance, but also you have to seek help. But a person when with psychological tumah, when a person comes depressed, on one hand, a person needs very often help, but the person helping can't do it himself. It has to be done also by the person who is depressed. And that's the symbol of the mikveh. The symbol of the mikveh, I go into the mikveh and I become a new person. I go from a state of non-existence and a state of a process of dying into a state of a process of living. I have to realize that I can do it, but I have to do it also. I can't just rely on others to do it for me. And the Gemara in Brachas mentions about two Amoraim, that one was sick and the other wasn't sick. The other came to Mevakacholahem, and he asked him, and he tried to encourage him to feel better. And he said, and ultimately it came out, why was he, I think it was Rabbi Lezer, why was he so depressed? He was depressed ultimately because he was going to die. And the one who came to Mevakacholahem, so the one who was sick said, give me your hand. In other words, when we are in a state of depression, we have to get up ourselves, but at the same time, we need help from others. This is the idea behind the paraduma, the tumah paraduma. We have to realize, yes, we encounter depressing circumstances, but we can't let depression overcome us. We can act as Yaakov and reverse the process by realizing there is more to life than the depressing circumstances that overtook us. And we have to understand that just like the mikveh, we can go from a state of non-existence, we can enter into a state of existence. This is the lesson, the what of Parad. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yesh koach. So if anyone has questions on this, you can put them in the chat, and I will ask them on your behalf. Question slightly off topic was how come why doesn't next week's parsha Pinchas start with the end of Balak with what Pinchas did?
And Pinchas is a long enough Sedra as it is what I would suggest. And I guess that the focus of Pinchas is, on the contrary, the reward that Pinchas got. The kahuna focuses on Pinchas more than the incident, whereas in the end of this week's Sedra, the end of parshas Balak, Pinchas is mentioned because it's talking about the incident.
Also, I think we I think Rabbi's discussed it by parshas Vaychi. There is some type of Masorah of where parshas are supposed to start and end.
That's
so it's
correct.
not like a person chose to end the parsha then, but there's some type of.
I assume that his question is, why did they make the Sedra, the Ezra who divided the Sedras, why did he divide the Sedra? Can you imagine we have Chukas, Balak, and the beginning of Parshas Pinchas together?
Or just take the end of Balak out from Balak, and then have that as Pinchas. But then you lose the connection to that Balak. That Bilam was the one who suggested it.
It just wouldn't work with the psukim besides everything else. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Nothing else is popping up. If anyone has a question, please write it in the chat. Okay, someone's asking that from Parshas Bechukosai, in Bechukosai Telechu, it seems the whole Torah is a chok, not just paraduma.
It's Chukas Torah. That's true. The whole Torah is a chok, but this is the ultimate chok that we learn what our attitude has to be regarding the other mitzvahs. I probably failed to mention, but if you take a look at the beginning of Parshas Chukas, in other words, there is an opinion, Tosfos and Brachas. The Gra says that Tosfos doesn't hold that way, but the manuscripts that have been discovered later show that Tosfos does hold that way. There is an opinion that Parshas Chukas, that Parshas Chukas is a reading. Parshas Para is a mitzvah d'oraisa. And the question is, Amalek, we know it's a mitzvah d'oraisa reading because Zachar Eisa Sherasa L'cha Amalek. But where do we see that Parshas Para should be at d'oraisa? And the answer, I think, is, my father gave a different answer, but I think the answer is, it says, Zos Chukas HaTorah, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe v'Aaron Lamor, God spoke to Moshe and Aaron saying, Zos Chukas HaTorah, this is the command of the Torah, Asher Tziva Hashem Lamor, that God commanded, Daber al Bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, V'yichu elecha paraduma, and they should bring a red para. Now, really, the psukim are not written properly. It should say, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe v'Aaron leimor, daber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta leihem. Zos chukas Torah. But it says first, zos chukas Torah, daber el bnei Yisrael. In other words, part of the Chukas Torah is telling the Jews about the mitzvah. Part of the Chukas Torah, why here specifically, is the telling of the about the mitzvah, telling the Jews about the mitzvah, part of the mitzvah. But the answer is because this is the symbol of chok. Chok is not something that just doesn't have a reason. It does have a reason. The chok is an act that demands an act of submission. And this is the symbol. So we have to react to the fact that it's a command. So therefore it says, Zos chukas Torah asher tziva Hashem leimor. This is the command that God commanded to say, Daber el bnei Yisrael. Speak to the Jewish people. So that's how we could. So that's part of it. Why is it? Because to emphasize that this is the ultimate chok, and this is the lesson how we're supposed to observe the other mitzvos, even the mitzvos that have reasons for it. We have to observe it because we submit to the command of God.
Okay, someone asks, when all is said and done, the paraduma is a celebration of life?
Yes.
Or at least a celebration of the attitude towards life that we have to have.
Being able to overcome the tragedy that we encountered, and to enter this, to reverse the process of seeing life as a process of living rather than a process of dying.
Okay, a question on the other, from a different part of the parsha. What's the significance of the interchange between the donkey and Bilam?
Okay, I'll explain. The interchange between the donkey and Bilam is the Bilam thought of himself. It's very interesting. Bilam, our sages tell us that I was actually thinking of speaking about that. Our sages tell us that Lo Kambi, Torah says, Lo Kambi Yisrael, Abba Bumos Ha'olam Kam. Among the nations of the world, among the Jewish people, there rose no one like Moshe. But among the nations of the world, there did arise. And who? And that's Bilam. So the question is, how Bilam Rasha is equated with Moshe Rabbeinu. How is it possible to understand that? And then the Gemara in Bava Basra says, Moshe Kasav Sifro Parshas Bilam. Moshe wrote his book and the parsha of Bilam also. So the question is, the parsha of Bilam, that's part of the Chumash. That's his book. That's Moshe's book. What does it mean? So Reb Chaim said that the Torah, that the Torah was that the Parshas Bilam became Torah not when it was repeated or written by Moshe, but it became Torah beforehand when the Matovo Halacha Yaakov was said to Bilam. When Bilam actually through Bilam's mouth came the Matovo Halacha Yaakov, these brachas on the Jewish people. So then it became Torah, even before Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it down. So Moshe Rabbeinu and Bilam had that distinction, that they're both of them were able to produce Torah. But the question is, what was the difference between Moshe and Bilam? So my father told me that the Reb Chaim said, I guess this was after Thomas Edison, the Reb Chaim said Bilam was like a phonograph for God. But whereas Moshe was a person, and I saw the same answer given in different words in the name of Reb Chaim. He said Moshe was God's ambassador. Bilam was God's postman. In other words, the message is independent of the person. But Bilam was very haughty. And Bilam thought of himself as being on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. Perhaps he thought of himself as being on a higher level, because he was giving special distinction. But it was Ruach HaKodesh is, according to the Rambam and Moreh Nevuchim, it's a normal thing when a person reaches a certain level. So Ruach HaKodesh is not supernatural, it's natural. On the contrary, if a person reaches that level and doesn't get Ruach HaKodesh, that's not natural, the Rambam says. But Bilam thought that he was special. So, and Bilam, the question is, why was Bilam chosen to be the one who gave over? Some say because he was the one that was accepted by the nations of the world. I think there's another possible reason, and that is that Bilam, the Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim that to be a Navi, one needs to have both spiritual perfection and intellectual perfection. There was no one among Dumos Olam who had spiritual perfection. But Bilam might have had intellectual perfection. He might have been the intellect giant of his age. So he was given Nevuah because that's one of the prerequisites, but it wasn't natural. For Nevuah to be natural, a person has to have moral perfection. So, but Bilam thought of himself as being on a very high level. So it was important for Bilam to see, so the two lessons, it was important for Bilam to see that God could make even a donkey see things that a regular person can't see. The donkey saw the angel. Don't be so haughty, Bilam. Don't think you're a great person. Your nevuah, your prophecy isn't unnatural. It was just necessary for the situation. Because sometimes, unnaturally, a donkey could see more than you could see. And more than that, it comes to tell us, Kina, Taiva, and Kavod, Mutzinas, Adam, and Olam, man loses contact with reality. This giant intellect, Bilam, his donkey starts talking to him, and he is so angry that he starts having a conversation with the donkey. He doesn't realize, hey, maybe there's something going on here. But that's the power of Kina, Taiva, and Kavod. It affects even the greatest geniuses, the greatest intellects. Intellectual perfection without moral perfection is nothing. And that's the lesson of Bilam.
Thank you. There are not any other questions. And for those near to show, you just got a Dvar Torah for Balak.
Okay.
So that's good. So God willing, next week, same time, same code. And anyone wants to see last week or the previous shiurim, just Google Rabbi Moshe Soloveichik and Parsha on YouTube. You should be able to find it pretty easily. They're all on the same channel. And just can you explain about being an ambassador versus being the postman?
Okay. The postman has nothing to do with the message. He just delivers it. The ambassador plays a role in the giving over of the message. There's a connection between him and the message, whereas the postman, there is no connection between the message and him. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he gave over the message, it was because because of who he was to give over the message. Bilam, it wasn't who he was. It's just that information had to be given over.
Thank you very much. Have a good week. Yashar koach. Thank you all for joining.